Have you ever worked your whole life to build something, not just a house, not just savings, but a life, and then had it disappear while you were lying in a hospital bed, too sick to fight back? I have. And I want to tell you what happened. All of it, because maybe you've been there too. Or maybe someone you love is going through something similar right now. Either way, I think you need to hear this. My name is Patrick. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working in commercial refrigeration, cold storage units, walk-in freezers, industrial cooling systems for grocery chains across southern Ontario. It wasn't glamorous work. My hands are proof of that. But it was honest work, and it paid well enough that by the time I retired at 62, I had a paid-off house in Barrie, a solid RRSP, and a small rental property on the edge of town that brought in about $1,400 a month. Nothing extravagant, just enough to feel safe, to feel like all those years had meant something. My wife, Patricia, passed away in the spring of 2019. Ovarian cancer. We had 34 years together, and losing her unraveled me in ways I still don't fully have words for. We used to sit on the back porch every evening, even in October, with tea and a blanket. After she was gone, I couldn't even look at that porch for almost a year. Our daughter, Amber, was devastated too. She flew in from Calgary, stayed for 2 weeks, helped me through the funeral, helped me pack up some of Patricia's things. We cried together. We laughed at old stories. Those 2 weeks felt like the closest we'd been since she was a teenager. Then she went back to Calgary, back to her husband Nolan, back to her life. And the calls got shorter. I understood it at first. She had a career, 2 kids of her own, a busy life. I didn't want to be the kind of father who made his grief someone else's obligation. So I filled the time as best I could. Morning walks along Kempenfelt Bay. Wednesday nights at the Legion, with a couple of the old guys from work. Sudoku. Way too much hockey on television. But grief doesn't just sit still, especially when you're alone with it. Somewhere in that second winter without Patricia, I started having a drink before bed to help me sleep. Then 1 drink became 2. Then it stopped being just before bed. I didn't even notice how far it had gone until my doctor sat me down in January of 2022 and said the words I wasn't ready to hear. My liver enzymes were badly elevated. I was showing early signs of alcohol-related damage, and if I didn't stop completely, we were looking at cirrhosis within 5 years. He referred me to a residential treatment program in Orillia, 12 weeks. I had to think about it for 3 days before I agreed to go. I called Amber from my kitchen the night I made the decision. It was a hard call to make. Telling your daughter you have a drinking problem when she's already been worrying about you from 2,000 kilometers away. That's not easy. She went quiet on the line for a long moment, then she said she was glad I was going. She said she'd been scared for me. She said she'd call every week. And she did. For the first 4 weeks. The treatment center was a calm place once I got past the first week. 12 of us in the program. Group sessions in the morning, one-on-one counseling in the afternoon, evening meetings. They took our phones at intake and gave them back on a schedule. We could use them on Sunday afternoons for 2 hours. So every Sunday I'd sit in the common room with the others and call whoever I could. Amber answered 3 Sundays out of 12. By week 8, I'd stopped trying to reach her and started leaving short voicemails instead. Just checking in. Sweetheart. Program's going well, miss you. I told myself she was busy. I told myself the time difference was tricky. I told myself she was probably just having a hard stretch at work. The last week of the program, our counselor, a quiet, patient man named Bernard, asked each of us to name one person who would be there when we walked out. One person. Just one. I said Amber's name without even thinking. The morning I was discharged was the 14th of April. There was still snow on the ground. Not much. Just that stubborn late spring kind that collects in the shadows along fence lines. I had a duffel bag, a discharge folder, and $62 in my wallet. I stood at the front doors of the center and looked out at the parking lot. No one was there. I checked my phone. 3 texts from Amber, all sent the night before. The first said she was sorry. Something had come up with the kids. The second said Nolan would try to arrange someone to pick me up. The third said she hoped the program had helped and that she loved me. No ride, no name of who was coming, no follow-up. I went back inside and asked the front desk if I could use their phone to call a cab. The woman behind the desk, she had kind eyes and a voice that reminded me of Patricia's sister, looked at me for a moment and then said quietly that the center had a shuttle that ran to the GO station in Barrie on Thursdays. But today was Monday. She was sorry. I thanked her and walked back outside. I stood there for probably 10 minutes. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like mud and pine. A couple of other patients were being picked up. A woman about my age, collected by her sister who got out of the car and hugged her right there in the lot. A younger man whose wife came with his 2 kids, and the little one ran to him before the car even stopped properly. I watched all of it, and I didn't feel sorry for myself exactly. It was more like a very clear, very quiet understanding of where I stood. I was reaching into my pocket for my phone to look up a taxi number when someone said, "Patrick?" I turned around. Standing a few feet away was a young man, mid-30s maybe, dark jacket, clean shave, the kind of calm in his face that comes from having been through things. He was holding a coffee cup from Tim Hortons and looking at me like he wasn't sure whether to smile or not. I didn't recognize him. "I'm sorry," I said. "Do I know you?" He said his name was Theo. And then he asked me if I remembered a winter night in 2004, a broken-down Civic on Highway 11 outside Innisfil, and a man in a refrigeration van who stopped and waited with him in the cold until CAA arrived. I remember. It had been one of those nights in February where the temperature dropped to -26 with the wind. I'd been coming back from a service call in Alliston, late, around 11. I saw the hazard lights from half a kilometer away and pulled over without thinking about it much. A kid, he must have been 19 or 20, standing beside a car with the hood up, no winter coat worth mentioning, already shaking. I sat with him in the van with the heat running for almost 2 hours until the tow truck came. I gave him my extra coffee from the thermos and an old wool blanket I kept in the back. I drove him to a gas station in Bradford so he could call his uncle to come get him, and then I went home and forgot about it, the way you do when you've just done something small and decent. I hadn't thought about that night in probably 15 years. Theo said he never forgot it. He said he'd been driving back to his mother's place in Barrie after a job interview in Newmarket, had just moved to Ontario from Halifax, knew nobody, didn't have a cell phone plan that worked in Canada yet, and was completely alone on the side of a highway in the worst cold he'd ever experienced. He said if I hadn't stopped, he genuinely didn't know what would have happened. He finished his social work degree the following year. Then he went back to school for law. He'd been with a family law firm in Barrie for the last 6 years. I looked at him. I didn't quite know what to say. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. He said he hadn't known exactly. He said his firm had been contacted 3 weeks ago by my son-in-law, Nolan, about some paperwork involving my rental property. Something about a power of attorney. Theo had flagged it to a colleague because the language in the documents seemed off. When the property address came up as belonging to a Patrick Hennessy in Barrie, and the circumstances seemed unusual, he'd done some checking. He said gently, "I think you need to know what's been happening." We sat in his car in that parking lot for 40 minutes. He walked me through everything he'd found, carefully and calmly, the way I imagine he'd been trained to do. Nolan had filed a limited power of attorney in my name, backdated, with a signature that wasn't mine, transferring authority over my rental property to himself 6 months earlier, back in October. He had collected the rent from my tenants in December and February without depositing it to my account. He had also contacted my financial advisor's office twice, posing as a family member, requesting information about the maturity dates on my GICs. The rental property alone had a market value of around $310,000. I sat there in the passenger seat of Theo's car, and I did not say a word for almost a minute. I thought about Amber. I thought about the 4 missing Sunday calls. I thought about Nolan's voice on the rare occasions he got on the phone with me, always a little too smooth, always pivoting the conversation back to finances, back to what your situation looks like going forward, Patrick. I had put it down to him being a planner. He was in insurance. I thought that was just how insurance people talked. I thought about Patricia. I thought about how she never quite trusted him, and how she said it to me once, just once, quietly, the way she said the things she wasn't sure she should say. There's something about the way he looks at things, Pat, not at people, at things. She had been right. I said to Theo, "Does Amber know?" He paused. He said he didn't know for certain, but he said the documents had been filed without any apparent involvement from her. Her name wasn't on any of the paperwork. That didn't answer the question entirely, but it was something. Theo drove me to my house in Barrie. He came inside and sat with me at the kitchen table, and over the next hour he laid out what his firm could do. He said this was exactly the kind of case they handled: exploitation of vulnerable adults, fraudulent POA filings, financial elder abuse. He said the backdated signature was a serious problem for Nolan, and the collected rent receipts were a paper trail that was hard to walk back from. He wasn't charging me. He said, "Let me just make it right." Simply, like it was obvious. I called Amber that evening. She answered on the second ring, which was the first time she'd done that in months. I could hear in her voice that she'd been expecting me to be upset about the pickup. She started with, "Dad, I'm so sorry about this morning. Things have just been." I said, "I need you to listen to me, sweetheart. Not as my daughter right now, just as someone who needs to hear the truth." There was a long silence. I told her everything Theo had found. I kept my voice level. I didn't accuse her of anything because I didn't believe she was part of it. But I told her that her husband had been inside my finances while I was in treatment, and that what he'd done was not something that got resolved with a conversation. She was quiet for a very long time after I finished. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "He told me the property paperwork was just to protect you, in case something happened while you were in the program. He said you'd asked him to." I hadn't asked him to do anything. The silence between us after that was the kind that holds too much to speak through. I want to be honest about what followed, because I think it matters more than the legal outcome. Amber called me back 2 hours later. She had been crying. She said she had asked Nolan directly, and that the conversation had gone badly, and that she was scared. She said she was sorry she hadn't called on Sundays. She said she was sorry she hadn't been in that parking lot. She said she hadn't known how to be a daughter to a father who was falling apart when she herself was still trying to understand how to live in a world without her mother. I understood that. I had needed someone to say it out loud, but I understood it. Theo's firm filed a complaint with the Law Society and initiated civil proceedings against Nolan within 3 weeks. The backdated power of attorney was flagged to the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General's Office, which takes fraudulent POA filing seriously. It's a criminal matter under the Substitute Decisions Act. The rent Nolan had collected was frozen. He retained his own lawyer, but Theo had told me from the beginning that the paper trail was too clean and too damning. 6 months later, Nolan agreed to a settlement that returned every dollar he had taken, plus costs. His firm was notified. The marriage did not survive it. That wasn't something I had wanted, but it wasn't something I had done either. What I had done, 19 years earlier, was pull over on a frozen highway because a kid was standing in the dark with no coat and no help coming. I had not done it to bank it. I hadn't thought about it in 15 years. But it had come back around in the way that certain things do, quietly, without announcement, exactly when it was needed. I finished my aftercare program in the fall. My liver numbers came back to normal range by December. I have not had a drink since the night before I went into treatment. I'm not going to pretend it's easy every day. Some days it isn't, but most days it is. Amber and I talk every Sunday now. Not because she owes me. Because we decided we wanted to. Because we're both still here, and Patricia is not, and we are each other's remaining piece of her. Last spring, I drove out to Innisfil and stopped on the shoulder of Highway 11, not far from where I remembered it being. I sat there for a few minutes with the engine running. The fields on either side were just starting to go green. A crow was doing something in the ditch. It was nothing and it was everything. I've been thinking lately about what it means to be a decent person when nobody's watching. Not in a grand way, just in the ordinary, every Tuesday of your life way. Stopping when someone needs help. Showing up. Keeping your word. I didn't stop for Theo that night because I was a hero. I stopped because I was a person with a warm van and a conscience and 20 minutes to spare, and someone needed both. I don't know who might be reading this right now, or listening. Maybe you're going through something that makes the world feel very small and very cold. Maybe someone you trusted has taken something from you. Maybe the person you expected to be there just wasn't. I want you to know, it doesn't always stay that way. The people who count on you to stay broken are usually not as powerful as they seem. And the kindness you put into the world, even the small, forgotten, February night kind, doesn't disappear. It just travels somewhere you can't see yet.